Thank you for the nice introduction, Betsy. I've never been whooped for, so that was great. So you all are familiar with JFCS, and there are some pamphlets and cards on each table, so feel free to take those to learn more about the services that we provide to the community. Holistic Social Service Agency, and we provide services to the entire community. Just a few of our programs are specifically for the Jewish community. So, we don't have much time and we have a big topic. So I just want to say that this can be a challenging topic. And like Betsy said, with Valentine's Day coming up, thinking about self-care and how we can care for ourselves, I think is one of the most important ways we can start to think about this topic. Because if we can care for our own well-being and understand the challenges we're facing, we're most likely then better equipped to support those around us as well. And so many of us are caregivers and support others, and we may forget to care for ourselves. And so I think that the number one gift you can give to yourself is to really check in on your own well-being and how you're doing, and thinking about what's working, what's not, what you might need to change. And so this can be a challenging topic. It can be a really powerful topic too. So I just want to create a safe space in the room to say, this can be tough stuff to go through for some of us, and just to acknowledge that, to recognize that, and to take care of ourselves while we are going through this conversation. And then we all have very different experiences with mental health individually and in our families and our friends. So we may have things we want to share, and that's great, and we'll understand that we all are coming from different places on this. So I like to start out with just asking a few questions to think about this topic and get our brains going, to focus on the topic of mental health. So the first question I have for you all is, how do you define mental health? And actually, another question I have is, anyone in the mental health field in the room? No? Okay. Well, so how would you define mental health? Anyone want to get us started? Normally I'd have us go in small groups and have a little discussion, but I don't think we have time for that. So anybody want to get us started? Yeah, Michelle.
So I think about maybe more clinical threshold, but at the point where it gets in the way of you being able to live your life fully. So if relationships aren't as rich, or you're not able to do work, or somehow it gets in the way of you being able to do work.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So if you're experiencing a challenge around your mental health, it's going to affect your day-to-day living. It's going to significantly impact how you experience your world and how you're able to get through your day. Yes, for sure. Did I see another hand? Yeah, Brian.
Yeah, I would say it's your ability to, good mental health is your ability to be a functional human being. Mm-hmm. And understanding that we're all just temporarily functional.
Yes.
I don't think anybody's totally functional 100% of the time. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's dynamic, right? So mental health is something that pertains to us as human beings throughout our entire lifespan, and it changes significantly depending on what stage we are in our life and what we're up to. So that's why it's also important to keep checking in with ourselves, because it can change and you might not even be aware of it unless you stop and say, like, oh, what's happening with me today, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and was there one more hand right there? Yeah.
Well, I'd say happiness is a natural. Happiness, from my experience, is something that dysthymia, which is chronic low-grade depression. Mm-hmm. Not being depressed is just wonderful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so being in the position where you can be happy, right, and enjoy your life is, you really need your mental health to be supported to be able to do that, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. Thank you for sharing that. And another question, which I'll just ask you to think about, is what do you do to take care of your own mental health? So maybe just spend a minute or two thinking about that now as we go through, and then at the end we'll share a little bit more about that, okay? And so, as Betsy was saying, I have my past life in higher education. I was a political science professor and a global health professor, and so a lot of the work that I do around mental health comes from that perspective of public health, of global health, and I know a lot of the work that you do in Rotary around humanitarianism and well-being has a lot of synergies in this area as well. And I'm myself not a therapist, but I do therapeutic work with families in the community, and so I think there's a lot of discussion and a lot of synergy here. So if you have comments, you have questions, things you want to talk about, please raise your hand during the presentation. We'd love to hear from you, and I'm also happy to talk more offline afterwards. Okay, so using that global health perspective, a definition of mental health that I like to use comes from the World Health Organization. And here, this idea that there is no health without mental health. So many times, I think especially in our culture in the United States, we separate out physical health from mental health. And that is really a detriment to both of those categories, because you cannot be fully healthy unless you have support in both of those areas, so that you have support for your physical health and your mental health, and they are so intertwined that I think it's really a false dichotomy to separate them out like that. And so the definition from the World Health Organization starts off with the idea that mental health is a human right. So every human being alive today has a right to get support for their mental well-being. And that's something that we know is violated significantly many times over in the United States and across the world. We simply do not have the structures and the amount of professionals needed, and many people don't have the resources needed to get the care that they need to support their mental health. And that's just kind of the backdrop to this, which explains in some way the stigma that exists around mental health, and also the reason as to why on average most Americans wait between 10 and 11 years to get treatment for mental health from the time that they first experience a symptom. And so you think that 10 to 11 year time period where someone is, suffering from in varying different ways with that mental health challenge that they're facing, and they may not have any support for it. And that really impacts the quality of their entire life and their well-being. It also is a significant impact on the amount of years they have to live, right? So many people die early, or they have chronic other conditions that are exacerbated by their mental illnesses. And so the idea that people are essentially forced from a variety of different circumstances to wait 10 to 11 years to get the help they need, we wouldn't necessarily see that if we were talking about other physical health conditions. For some people, right? Some people still would be, unfortunately. But, so this idea, the definition of mental health for the World Health Organization, it is a human right, and mental health is a state of well-being in which the individual realizes his or her own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to their community. And also, as was mentioned back here, hopefully they have some enjoyment they can get out of their life, right? So that state of mental health, you see someone who is able to deal with the challenges life faces them, they're able to cope, they can be productive, they can make a contribution, they are realizing what their own abilities are and how they can support those. So there's a lot going on there, right? And you can think about all the different things that are needed to support someone's mental health. And this is especially true if we think about this from a global health perspective, that we know that the number one marker for ill health across the board, any kind of illness you're talking about, is poverty. Right? This is no different when we're talking about mental illness. So we know that significant numbers of people across the world and in the United States and in the Twin Cities are living in poverty, and this is a negative impact on their mental health. And so as we mentioned before, mental health is applicable at every stage of an individual's life. And there's many factors that can contribute to an individual's mental health overall. So these are biological factors, things having to do with genes, hormones, brain chemistry, things that are outside of your control. Then you have your life experiences, things that happen to you in the world, and the social world that you live within. And then also your family and your family history. So the economic side of things is almost as equally as important as I was just mentioning. And so with this conversation, we're covering a lot of ground, and we know that there are many different types of mental illnesses, so we're really using very broad strokes to talk about this topic. But we know that a lot of people experience mental illness after some sort of trauma, And so we often hear this word trauma in the news, and we can think about that and what that means. But at JFCS, we're a trauma-informed agency, meaning that we understand that the experiences people have in their life can really impact the quality of their life, their day-to-day life, and how well they do on any given day, thinking about what has happened to them before they walked in the door, before they showed up wherever they are, right? This idea that there are big T traumas, things that we would think about as being horrible events like an accident of some kind, some sort of abuse, if you were a part of any sort of conflict. These are big T traumas that we think about and we know can be extremely traumatic. And then there's the little T traumas, which are things that are kind of lower level, chronic, can happen to you many times over the course of a year or a given time. So if we think about the pandemic, for most people experience a lot of little T traumas during that time and still may be dealing with those. So this idea that mental health can be impacted by what's happening around you and the environment around you is, I think, an important thing just to keep in mind, and what's happening in your own little world and also like nationally. As a political scientist, I think a lot about politics and what's happening in the world coming up and what's happening in November with the elections, right? This can be a source of trauma for people and something to keep in mind. Okay, so another question we get about mental health is how many people are suffering from mental illness in the United States today? And this is data from NAMI, the National Alliance of Mental Health, and the CDC also has come up with similar data, so I like this stuff because if you're gonna Google this, you might find a whole variety of different numbers on this topic, but this idea that we have two sources that are telling us this, I think makes this the most reputable, is that it's 1 in 5 adults experiences mental illness in the United States today. That's as common as silver cars, okay? That is very common. So it's not necessarily something that most people talk about, but the fact is that most of us have some sort of experience with mental illness, whether that's for us individually or in our family or with someone that we care about, right? So the idea that if we talk more about this and ask each other about it and learn more about it, that can go a very long way towards increased understanding and also destigmatizing this, right? So that we may come to a place where we can, as a society, be more open and understanding and accepting of individuals who suffer from mental illnesses of a variety of kinds. Another stat to look at here is 17% of youth, so kids aged 16 to 17, are experiencing a mental health disorder. And this number has increased significantly, especially among teen girls in the past several years. That's been in the news quite a bit lately. We can look at the reasons as to why behind that. The exact cause is hard to put your finger on, but the combination of factors including social media, increased pressure, fear of missing out, increased challenges of academics, all these things combined have made it a really challenging situation, especially for teen girls. And so that may be something that you're familiar with.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Probably a dumb question. Mental illness or mental health versus neurodivergence, how do those?
Yeah, so the question is the relationship between mental health and the concept of neurodivergence or ADHD. Yeah, so mental health or mental illness is really a broader sort of bucket term that includes a lot of different varieties within it. ADHD itself is classified into a somewhat different category, but an individual who's neurodivergent also is suffering from a disability that, I have a slide on this later, that's like a invisible disability and may experience the world differently and need support and also faces stigma, but it's in a somewhat separate category than
So they wouldn't fall in those numbers?
I'd have to look and see how they measured it.
Okay.
Yeah, but that's a good question. Potentially they could be, but I'd have to do a little digging and see. Okay. So getting into a little more detail here, if we look at what are the most common mental illnesses, anxiety disorders, and this is data from 2024. And anxiety disorders are the #1 most common mental illness in the United States. Then we have major depression, PTSD, which specifically relates to the topic of trauma, as we were just talking about. Bipolar disorder at 2.8%, borderline personality disorder at 1.4%, and eating disorders at 1.2%. And the the symptoms of any one of these could, would look a lot of different, right? There's a lot of potential symptoms you might experience based on these different illnesses here on the board, so that's why I'm saying we're painting in very broad strokes. But anxiety disorder and major depression are really the top two that are the most common and you're most likely to experience, or you're most likely to know about someone suffering from. And again, if we're looking at who is suffering, mental illnesses affect all people from all walks of life. Women do suffer higher rates of depression than their male counterparts, and there's a lot of research into the why behind that, but the social pressures and also some biological factors that are thought to really factor in here as well.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Where does addiction fit in to the notion of?
Yeah. So this is a really important question and a big question, that addiction recovery is a mental illness. It is something that has to do with the chemistry in your brain and the way that your brain functions, and so it is classified as a mental illness. It's not here on the list, which you might expect it to be, right? And sometimes people are categorizing addiction as a completely separate category, or they may not think of it necessarily as a disease, but they are all diseases. And they're diseases of the brain that can be treated and oftentimes prevented with the right supports. Okay, so this is a question we get a lot about what are the common signs or symptoms of a mental illness. And there's a lot here on the slide, so I don't want to go through and read everything, but the biggest thing when, like, if I have families that I'm meeting with and they're asking, like, is this normal? Like, what should I do? Like, whether we're talking about, say, a teen or someone in their family, the biggest thing I always say is to trust yourself, right? If you know this person, you know what their baseline is, you know how they normally operate, and if there's deviation from that baseline, then that's your first clue that there may be something going on, right? Trust yourself. If you think that there may be something going on, whether with yourself or someone you care about, then that is your first indicator that you should do a little bit more digging and say something, support that individual in a way you think makes the most sense. So if there is that deviation from the baseline that lasts more than 2 weeks, that is what I normally say, and to trust yourself. So things that would be red flags that are listed here are not enjoying the things that you would normally think that this person would enjoy, or same for yourself, right? Like, say I used to love going out for dinner all the time and now I don't even care, like I don't even want to go. And you can't really explain as to why, you're just like, I don't want to. So you lose interest in the things that you normally like to do. You may be withdrawn, you may have changes in your appetite, changes in your sleep schedule, you may lose weight or gain weight. These are clues, right, that it could be something with mental illness, it could be something else, right? But these are kind of the warning signs that we would commonly look for. If anyone ever talks about thinking about ending their life or harming themselves in some way, that is a very big red flag that you would want to do something about right away. And if you thought that that was an imminent type of thing, you would want to call 911. And other things to look for are severe out of control behaviors, someone taking risks that really seem out of the ordinary for that person. If you have intense fear or anxiety that really debilitates you or debilitates that person so they can't go through their daily life as they normally would have. Seeing things that aren't real, that's another key sign to look for. Excessive use of alcohol or drugs, and that's something that may be harder to know if that person is keeping that secret, which is you often see. And then changes in mood. Again, and we're talking about teens, some of these are harder to know as well. So it's good to reflect on this over time and check in. And intense worries or fears that may get in the way of your normal daily activities. So other things like feeling really helpless, out of control, very low self-esteem, these are all keys or clues that potentially there's something going on here that needs some more attention and support. So when to seek help. Don't wait until you notice severe symptoms. If you have a primary care provider, talk to them. Engage in your support network and reach out for help if you are the one experiencing it. That is a really powerful thing to do, and you know, if you go and you ask a friend, they're gonna be there for you to help you, but they can't know that you need their help unless you ask, oftentimes. So say something, talk about it. That's why destigmatizing this is so important, because if we can all talk more about this, then we can all be there to help each other out. And I have a bunch of resources at the end that are crisis numbers, call centers you can call to get support. You can call JFCS for support, connection with therapy and counseling. There's a lot of support out there. It's just trying to be aware of what it is and knowing where to find it. All right, so what do you say or do if someone is experiencing a mental illness or you think they may be? What would you say to that person? Yeah.
I'd say, well, what can I do to help? How can I help you?
Yeah.
And I've been in this situation, and they say, well, nothing at all because I'm fine.
Yeah.
And we all know they're not fine.
Right.
And they were talking to a doctor and that, and would not open up at all. Which, you know, I don't need to know either, but she just, you know, I think they need my doctor. Well, sometimes you need somebody else to talk to.
Yeah.
But, so, you got any good ideas? That would be great.
Yeah, well, I'm just starting out with saying, like, I'm here for you.
Yeah.
What do you need?
They know that.
Yeah, saying something like that is the best first thing to say. You have, say something, right? Even if you just have like a little inkling in the back of your mind, say something. You don't even have to assume that whatever it is they're going through, just to say, I'm here. Like, it seems like you might have been going through a tough time lately, I'm here for you, or do you wanna go grab a coffee or go for a walk or something like that. You don't have to get into the specifics of it, but just being there and showing up, that's the number one thing you can do, because then you are there and, you know, maybe you go and have that coffee and some other things may come out. Or can I drive you somewhere? Do you need help getting to an appointment? Right, or can I go with you if someone you think, you know, may appreciate that.
It's
I'm
very defensive.
very defensive. Yeah, and there's only so much you can do, right? You can only control so much, but you just keep at it, right? Text them every day or call them, you know, and maybe you have other friends in common, have them do the same. So being present and being that supportive presence is the number one thing that you can do. And
They
maybe
become totally isolated. All of their friends are now coming to me saying, what's going on?
yeah, that's a hard situation.
And if I say anything,
Yeah.
you know, I'm in trouble.
Right.
I'm often in trouble. But, you know,
Yeah, well, I think, I mean, that sounds like a more complicated situation potentially, but showing up for that person that needs that support right now and encouraging your friends to do the same and realizing that this is something you can do. You can't control everything, but you can do that, right? So you don't need to apologize if you are the person experiencing mental illness. Like people might say they feel guilt or shame. You don't need to apologize, right? This is something that so many of us always go through. And trying to like just be truthful around it and having those open conversations goes a very long way. But yes, continuing to show up, continuing to say something, and you know, this idea that there are a lot of different types of invisible illnesses out there is something to be aware of, right? And trying to talk someone out of it, I think, is some of the worst advice, like just buck up, things aren't that bad, right? And that's generally not the right take because it can minimize the experiences that that individual is feeling. And if you talk to yourself that way too, that can be harmful because then you may be talking yourself out of whatever experiences you're having and can be confusing, and it can also make yourself feel worse. So you'll have these slides, you can kind of see that just being supportive, being open, showing up, not assuming anything, those are the best ways to go and to support people around you and also to approach yourself. So I know we're running short on time here, and I asked you about what you do to care for your mental health. We don't have time to go through all of that now, but the quick lowdown of this is getting outside as much as possible, doing some sort of right-left movement, so walking, swimming, anything like that where it's repetitive and you can go and can help to reset your brain. And when I say get outside, I mean in all types of weather too, even if, you know, we don't have a lovely day, still get outside. Making sure you're hydrated and eating good foods. Those are the best things you can do to support your own mental health. And find things you enjoy to do, right? So whatever that looks like for you, try to make that a priority and make that happen to care for your own well-being, because that's gonna set you up to be feeling as best as you can. Sometimes that's not enough though, so if that's not enough and you're still feeling like you need help, you reach out. And so we have resources here, and like I was saying before, if you were worrying of an imminent crisis, you would call 911, but if you need crisis response, someone will come to you from, this is in Hennepin County, and assess the situation, give you recommendations, give you referrals on how to handle that situation. It can be a home, a public place. So the COPE Crisis Line, they're a great resource. I have also included my email here down at the bottom. You can feel free to always reach out to me. And then we have our direct line or our main line for JFCS where you can call and get information of all kinds. Oh, what happened?
That's the end.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, and some other great resources here too, which I know you can look back later on. So that was a very brief overview, but hopefully helpful. And I know a minute or two for questions. Yeah, anyone have any questions or comments?
One or two questions for Leah?
I guess I have something that I've thought about and I think would be helpful for other people to hear. Just your thoughts about at what point does something become like the difference between situational depression, anxiety, trauma, that kind of thing, versus illness. So like, because I think, when we think about COVID, I think those numbers, were way high up.
Yeah.
A lot of people were experiencing different things and maybe still are.
Yes.
So just in your perspective, what's like the difference between situational versus illness?
Yeah, so I'd say for situational experiences of, say, anxiety or depression or other mental illnesses, those are things that we all are going to experience at some point in our life. And oftentimes they ebb and flow, right? So, I mean, COVID was very long, so that's kind of a harder,
Right.
more unique situation. But in general, say you have a stress response that you are exposed to, and you have a response to that, and maybe it's very intense and you feel out of sorts for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, but you can maintain and then you kind of come back to your stable center. 2 or 3 weeks and then you're back to normal-ish, right? If it's more of a chronic type of situation, that's something that would be more long-lasting and that you would continue to experience even if that stressor has gone away. So it's something that is kind of hanging out with you or with whoever, that you're concerned about for a longer period of time, and even if the situations have changed, as a general guide. Is that helpful? Yeah. Anyone else?
I just have a pet peeve.
Sure.
Not a many. Okay, so say a person is on antidepressant drugs,
Yes.
and then you also have heart stuff and the rest of the world. And then you look at the medications and, okay, antidepressant, then everything else may cause depression.
Mm-hmm.
It just blows my mind. It's like, okay, how come?
Yeah, there's a lot of challenges in modern life that are novel, right? They are new. And it's hard for scientists to know exactly what's causing these upticks in the number of people suffering from depression, for example. But there's a lot of really interesting research about our own microbiomes and our internal health we have individually, and that can create depression if those sort of biomes are off within us. I mean, there's so many potential causes that you could look to, but if you try to maintain your well-being just individually as best you can, just using the simple kind of well-worn wisdom to get exercise, good health, good sleep, be hydrated, that's the best we can do right at this point. But yeah, a lot of people are suffering from depression right now, and the whys are very complicated.